when I first heard on TV about this virus and the politician said, oh, just 2 weeks, if we do a really good job, it'll all be over. I knew from that moment on, well, there goes at least the next 2 years of our lives. Because if there's anything you can count on for them to do, it's the opposite of what they say. By this time, even true believers in the system know they have been misled. So this video is for those who are just waking up and not so much for those who are aware of what's going on. What do I mean? Obviously, it only takes a shred of common sense to recognize that we are not in the midst of the apocalyptic threat that collaborating governments worldwide have made it out to be. Personally, I thought when this whole thing was first unraveling that the current elites were pretty sloppy compared to their forebears who are much more patient and methodical. And as if the botched 9/11 job wasn't bad enough, I thought surely no one is going to fall for this one. And yet, here we all are, almost a year into it. If you know anything about civilizations, you know that they usually proceed along a track made up of different phases. The current one we're in right now is that of conflict, which with the next one being that of empire, usually loosely tossed around with the term New World Order. The age of conflict is usually marked by wars, class struggle, that kind of thing. And one of the trademarks is that of irrationality, meaning everyone, the public, is meant to believe anything and everything that the state says. And how they get us to do these things, how they get us to trust them and believe them, is because they are very well versed in the ancient sciences of population maintenance, and they've had millennia to perfect this. For example, if you look over this past summer at the Black Lives Matter protests, just the sheer amount of verbal gymnastics that editors had to go through to make it seem like, oh no, as long as you protest, beg, in the government-approved way, then it's fine. There's no danger. It's okay. Cases aren't rising. But as soon as you march and rally again in the government-approved, appropriate way, then you know what? They're doing this against a virus. Oh man, cases are getting out of control. This is so wild. These people are so selfish. That's because this whole thing is really nothing more than a revolving door. For example, in the beginning, they had the masks, and if you wear the mask, you're safe. Don't worry about it. After that, go. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. That was in the winter time. If you have your mask, you're fine. Nothing bad will happen to you. And then studies started coming out. Actually, you know what? Wearing a mask isn't that healthy, and it doesn't really do anything for you. And then, like I was saying, in the winter time, it can only survive in the cold. That's why we don't see it in the warmer areas. And then how many peaks of this virus did we see during the summertime? Quite a few. Lastly, at first it was only affecting the elderly, the immunocompromised. So of course the younger people are still going to bars, still going to clubs. And I feel like millennials and below, when you grow up with the internet, you kind of have this other sense where you can tell, you know what, something's kind of off here. This is a little fishy. So I feel like they weren't as brainwashed as previous generations who have lived by the news for all their lives, and they could sense right away this is fake. The government, the news can just say one person died today, or they could say 1,000, and usually most of the population will believe it. And you might say, well, that's because this thing is brand new. It's always changing. It's so mysterious. But you have to really put in so much work to make all the pieces fit. Whereas if you just use common sense, it's thrown out the window automatically. But hold on, we are smarter than this. how do they trick us so easily? Well, for those still subject to mind control, i.e., newspapers, national coverage of events, even local news that makes you fear things that are happening next door, right in your own community, um, and other such mediums as state programming, the masses are made to listen to hand-picked experts and pre-selected professionals, and their utilization of biased graphs and fabricated models. You see, attention is readily given to those on government payrolls who support the mainstream agenda, despite the outstanding number of accredited virologists, doctors, scientists who disagree with the findings of the CDC, WHO, Bill Gates, not a doctor, and the news, of course. The brave few who speak out against this are silenced, discredited, fired, and sometimes accidentally killed for going against the steam-rolling machine that doesn't let anything get in its way. Very similar to the sheer number of climatologists who have an opinion other than propaganda scientists, than what propaganda scientists say about the heavily funded global warming scheme, also backed by someone who's not a scientist, Al Gore. That's because nowadays traditional science has been substituted for cherry-picked results that support a desired outcome, causing decades or sometimes centuries of studies, hard work, trial and error to be flipped on its head, as anyone who has taken one course in microbiology can tell you about the scamdemic we are currently being forced to deal with. Curious enough, in order for proper and proven facts to reach the public, a unanimous fascist censorship ban was announced by leading corporations to suppress the truth. Strange how they're all supposed to be in competition, yet on this one thing they all agree. Now they are counting on our ignorance of not knowing how to differentiate between bacteria and viruses, how they behave in regards to the human body, and feeding us a false version of history by justifying their actions with cases of the Spanish influenza over 100 years ago, when most people don't know what really happened back then. The reality of the situation is we are all part of an ongoing experiment carried out by those who know how to sway the mob to their will. Trust me, I realize the pressure is enormous to go along with the crowd and to follow what the useful idiot and shill celebrities do and say, since we have been conditioned to view them as role models, or to comply with the bribed and blackmailed politicians, even though they are caught in corrupt acts all the time, and in actuality are puppets that are chosen ahead of time based on how well they can serve and represent their true masters, which is not us. We are also meant to acknowledge who the government says our heroes should be. Formerly, military members were heroes, since the ruling class has a vested interest in using innocent and gullible people to die for an agenda pertaining to land, resources, wealth, not a cause like justice or the spreading of democracy, as is evident by the volume of homeless veterans, suicide rates, PTSD cases, and so forth. In the future, they will most likely choose a different profession that suits the elitist purposes, but presently it is frontline heroes, such as medical workers. So you may ask, why is this? Since people like nurses are in the spotlight, any of us would be considered ungrateful if we do not honor them, including being shunned from others, thought to be disrespectful if we refuse the vaccines administered by their hands. At this point, I would like to be clear that I do not hate soldiers, nurses, or individuals that sacrifice themselves for a greater good. But I do take up issue with the matrix that uses amazing people for deceptive intentions. Along the same line, I'm not saying vaccines are bad altogether, but the way they are being created and foisted upon us by those in charge of their corporations have a eugenics mentality. This means that any health benefits we would receive have been compromised by the addition of harmful ingredients so that a profit can be made at our expense, and if we do nothing, the expense of yet to be born generations. If the rulers continue on this road, injecting globalist culture into the populace with pre-calculated hashtags, slogans, and the like, such as alone, together, or socially distance, over time, few will know right from wrong, up from down, or even have an identity of their own other than what the state dictates. As we conclude with part one, if you are still on the fence, let's go over some details that come from official sources and aren't conspiracy. I really do prefer a skeptical consciousness and never want you to take my word for anything, as the press expects you to do, without even thinking for yourself. And by the way, if you hear kids in the background, a lot of it is for them, for the future, so they don't have to be subject to the same things that we have to put up with. So, number one, the vaccine that is being handed out directly in vast proportions is the most rushed vaccine ever developed, incorporating so much brand new technology that it cannot even be considered a vaccine in the traditional sense. Number two, the companies involved have been given full immunity from liability if their medical treatment causes injury, death, infertility complications, etc. 3. The clinical experiments are still unfinished, and the statistics made available thus far are heavily skewed due to the amount of money involved, and therefore the necessity to paint this modern miracle in a golden light. 4. Taking all of this into account, it can be surmised that any humans who partake in the fiasco are akin to willing guinea pigs, since the long-term effects do not yet exist to be analyzed. 5. Furthermore, with the lack of such data, there is no way to determine if the new vaccine will act as some sort of pathogenic priming, weakening the immune system for a separate or wild strain.